They say kindness is a virtue, but you're starting to wonder. Is it a weakness? You say yes when your body is screaming no. You apologize when you're not wrong. You give and give and give. And in return, you are overlooked, discarded, used. You're not angry, not yet. You're just tired. And somewhere deep down, there's a quiet, growing bitterness. Because the people you showed up for, they disappear the moment you need something back. Why does the world treat people pleasers like they're disposable? And why are the kindest people so often the most broken? To understand this, we have to go back nearly 200 years to a philosopher who lived alone, wrote about despair, and understood human souls like no one else. Søren Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard didn't speak of burnout or boundaries, but he spoke of something deeper, the spiritual illness of living a life dictated by the crowd, of becoming so obsessed with pleasing others that we forget who we are entirely. He called this despair, not the loud kind, not the wailing grief of loss, but the quiet despair of misalignment, the suffering of someone who still smiles and nods, but knows deep down they've betrayed their inner truth. He wrote, "The most common form of despair is not being who you are, and that is the tragedy of the chronic people pleaser. Because people pleasing isn't kindness, it's fear disguised as virtue. The most common form of despair is not being who you are." And in those few words, Kierkegaard diagnosed what modern psychology would take a century to name: identity fatigue. The kind of chronic emotional exhaustion that doesn't come from doing too much, but from becoming too little of yourself. We call them nice people, but often they're just exhausted souls who've spent years trying to be liked instead of being real. Why do they do it? Because pleasing others feels safer than confronting the terrifying possibility: what if I show my real self and they reject it? Kierkegaard believed that most people avoid this fear by merging into the crowd. Not necessarily a literal group, but the societal expectations, the unwritten rules of how to be. He called it the leveling process, a quiet cultural pressure to become average, agreeable, expected. The crowd is untruth, he warned, because the crowd doesn't care who you are. It only wants you to conform. And people-pleasing, when stripped down, is a spiritual surrender, a way of saying, I'd rather be accepted than authentic. But there's a cost. At first, it feels like peace, avoiding conflict, gaining approval. But over time, a deeper dissonance grows. You laugh when you're not amused. You say yes when you mean no. And eventually, you don't remember what you wanted in the first place. This is the despair Kierkegaard saw. A person slowly becoming a stranger to themselves. And here's the cruel irony. The more you give of yourself to others, without boundaries, without honesty, the more invisible you become. Not just to the world, but to yourself. So what's the way out? Kierkegaard believed that the antidote to despair wasn't self-esteem. It wasn't external success or even happiness. It was something harder, deeper. To become yourself. Not the version others prefer, not the polished persona, but the raw, complex, difficult truth of who you are. He called it the process of becoming a self before God, meaning a life where your actions are aligned not with social approval, but with your own moral and spiritual compass. That's terrifying because it demands solitude, honesty, courage, but it's also the only path to freedom. Because once you stop outsourcing your worth to others, you begin to reclaim your power. You begin to say no. You begin to speak up. You begin to choose, not out of fear, but out of alignment. And in a world that demands masks, your authenticity becomes rebellion. You want to be liked, that's not a crime. But slowly, invisibly, that want becomes a need. And the need becomes a prison. You start shaping yourself around what others expect. You laugh when you're dying inside. You agree when you disagree. You show up for birthdays, fix messes, carry guilt that doesn't belong to you. And the worst part? You do it so well, no one even sees your pain. You're the nice one, the helper, the reliable friend. But what they don't see is that you've become hollow, like a house that's been furnished by everyone else but never lived in by you. This isn't just behavior, it's despair. And that's exactly what Kierkegaard wrote about. Søren Kierkegaard believed the greatest danger to the human soul wasn't hatred or suffering. It was something quieter. The greatest hazard of all, losing one's self, can occur so quietly that it is as if it were nothing at all. For Kierkegaard, despair isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's simply the act of not becoming who you truly are. And here's the terrifying part. You can lose yourself by being too nice, by saying yes too often, by trying to be everything to everyone and nothing to yourself. In his book, The Sickness Unto Death, Kierkegaard describes a kind of despair where the self refuses to be itself. It's a person who molds their identity around others, who buries their needs, their desires, their truth, to avoid rejection. Sound familiar? It should, because people-pleasing isn't just a personality trait, it's existential self-abandonment. One of Kierkegaard's most famous ideas is this: purity of heart is to will one thing. But people-pleasers don't will one thing. They will 100 different things, all for other people. They want peace and honesty. They want love and boundaries. They want approval and authenticity. And in the end, they get none of it. Because when you try to make everyone else happy, you betray the part of you that's screaming to be known. This division, this split inside, is what Kierkegaard calls inauthentic living. You're not living your truth. You're performing a role. And slowly, you forget the difference. You might think, but I'm doing good. I'm being kind. Yes, but at what cost? Kindness without boundaries is not virtue. It's self-erasure. And the world is not gentle with those who erase themselves. Here's the part that hurts. The world often rewards confidence over compassion. It listens to loud voices, not kind hearts. People-pleasers tend to avoid conflict. They apologize first. They forgive quickly. They internalize blame. They suffer in silence. And guess what? That makes them easy targets. Bullies, narcissists, even corporations. They see your kindness not as strength, but as submission. Kierkegaard saw it too. In his journals, he writes, "Once you label me, you negate me." When the world sees you only as nice, it reduces you. You're no longer a full human being. You're a resource, a role, not a soul. And when you finally say no, they call you selfish. When you finally express a boundary, they say you've changed. But the truth is, you're just starting to exist. And that's terrifying, not for you, but for those who benefited from your silence. So what now? Do you stop being kind? Do you harden your heart and turn away? No, that's not the answer. The answer is not to become less kind. It's to become more whole. Becoming whole means this: saying no when it's easier to say yes, setting boundaries even when they disappoint others, letting go of relationships that only love you when you're small. It means accepting that some people will not like your wholeness, but they were never in love with you, only with your silence. And here's the paradox. The world may punish you for becoming whole, but your soul, it rejoices, because when you act from your center, not your fear, your kindness becomes fierce, not fragile. It's no longer a strategy for love, it's an expression of it. Let's redefine kindness, not as sacrifice, not as weakness, not as smiling through your own collapse, but as the courage to care from a full cup, not an empty one. This is what Kierkegaard meant when he spoke of the leap of faith, not a leap into someone else's expectations, but a leap into your authentic self, into a life where your kindness is no longer a prison, but a practice of freedom. You can be kind and assertive. You can be gentle and powerful. You can say no with love and mean it. Because true kindness is not about being liked. It's about being real. So maybe you felt used. Maybe you felt invisible. Maybe the world made you believe that being good means being small. But hear this. You are not here to shrink for the comfort of others. You are here to grow into yourself fully. Your voice matters. Your boundaries are sacred, and your kindness, when rooted in your truth, is the most powerful force in the world. So go ahead, say what you need to say, rest when you need to rest, walk away when you must, not because you're cruel, but because you're finally being kind to yourself. And that is the beginning of everything. If this spoke to something deep in you, if you've ever felt like you were disappearing behind your own smile, then let this be your reminder. You're not alone. Like the video if it resonated, subscribe if you're ready to reclaim your voice. And remember, true kindness doesn't come from fear. It comes from freedom.